theologian, the great American theologian, Walter Wink, says that in the human realm, theologically speaking, power is God-given, goddess-given, but it is invariably fallen. And this is how we need to understand the fall, not as an Adam and Eve dynamic way back in the mists of mythical time, but something right here. And so he talks about the importance of naming the powers. You need to state what the oppression is. Paulo Freire would call it conscientization, the bringing into consciousness and conscience what it is that oppresses us today. Putting names like Moloch, Mammon, the golden cow, onto the institutions of our world today that lead to oppression, including these institutions as they are reflected in each one of us. Because, any one of us look in the mirror and you will see the corporations reflected back at you. We are they. And we need to get real about naming that power. Unmasking the powers is the second stage, revealing how they operate to cause us oppression. I call it cultural psychotherapy, the need to do psychotherapy not just at an individual level of reclaiming our personal history and understanding how it makes us who we are, and also, often more tragically, who we are not. But doing this at a cultural level so as to use history as psychohistory, psychological and spiritual history. And doing that in order that we can engage with the powers. And this is where I've been thinking a lot recently in terms of some work I've been doing about the nature of community, about the temptations of Christ. In other words, not just the metaphorical light is there, the days, but the nights are there too, the shadow side. And this is something that in movement organizations, and particularly New Agey ones, there is a very serious deficiency in getting to grips with. The need to embrace the shadow in ourselves, and not just look at it in our governments or our corporations or whatever. 40 days and 40 nights. And what happens? But he encounters three types of being. He encounters angelic presences, which are described as being helpers. He encounters wild animals, the totems. And he encounters what in the Christian translations of the Bible is usually rendered as Satan. Trouble is, we miss the understanding of what's going on with this caricature of Satan. Because the actual word in Greek is diabolo. Now, my son, when he was a teenager, had a game called Diabolo, and it's two sticks with a string and a spinning disc, and you spin it around and you throw it up. Because the Greek word diabolo, from which we get devil, means to throw something across. To throw something across. And the secondary Greek meaning of the word diabolo is to traduce, to deceive, to corrupt, to trip somebody up by what you're throwing across. Now, what is it that the diabolo does in the temptations of Christ? Basically, what he does is he picks up three mighty pillars and throws them across the path of this young shaman who's out on his fishing quest. And those three pillars, I think we can think of as being the pillars of community. Because what were they? The first temptation is turn the stones into bread. And as Dostoevsky says in his discourse on the Great Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov, imagine the power you would have over the hungry masses if you could turn stones into bread. What we're looking at there is something to do with the power of nature. The temptation to short-circuit or abuse our relationship with nature. If you like, the temptation of industrial agriculture. and so on. That's the first temptation. That is the first pillar of what makes up community, that the devil has got up and thrown in front of this young man, hoping that he's going to stumble on it. Now, the second temptation is interesting, first of all, because Matthew's Gospel and Luke's Gospel disagree about the ordering, which is a wonderful point to make about to biblical fundamentalists, who say that every word in the Bible is literally true. Because if so, how come they muddle up the order that the temptations came in? But let's take Luke's ordering of it, which is the second temptation. It's the devil shows him all the kingdoms of the world. In our Scottish context, I describe it as the temptation of landlordism. Because what is it to be a landlord? But it's to take your livelihood by sucking rent out of those who are less advantaged than you. That's the parasitism of landlordism, the temptation of kingly power, of political power. In other words, the second temptation, the second pillar that the devil throws across him, is the temptation to abuse social power. So you've got the power of nature and you've got social power. And the third temptation, I think, is most interesting of all, and probably the one about which fewest sermons are preached, because it's one that's not in the interests of many of the kind of gentlemen whose portraits we passed when having lunch today to talk about. And that's where the devil takes him to a high point and says, jump off here, because God will send angels to rescue you. And he replies, don't put God to the test. Don't play with spiritual power. The third temptation is a temptation to abuse spiritual power. And so we have community comprising community with this earth, with this cosmos. Community with one another in the social realm. Community with the spiritual realm, with Goddess, God, Buddha nature, however you want to understand it. You've got soil, soul, and society as the three pillars of community. And to be indigenous is very simply to reconnect with those things. And most of the discourse in the world out there, which is about community development, such as might be taught in a typical university, like, I can't speak for this one, but certainly our universities in Scotland, are quite comfortable talking about environment and about social development. But they don't know how to handle the underpinning dynamics. Not dimension, it's not an added dimension that's a kind of optional extra. Spirituality is an underpinning. It is what holds everything else. It is that which gives life. They don't know how to handle that one. And so whether because of secular perversion or religious perversion, that's generally the pillar that they trip up on. They don't see it and they fall over it. And then you wonder how all the advertisements for motor cars or chocolate or holidays, how come they're appropriating all the spiritual language? And it's because they see it. The Diabolo saw it all along. That's the kind of politics we need to be doing to recover indigeneity.
Absolutely.